She was just walking past the janitor's closet until she heard him fluently switching between Arabic, Mandarin, and French while mopping the floor. That moment changed both of their lives forever. Claudia Renner hadn't planned on flying out that morning. She hated surprises, especially the kind that forced her to pack in a rush and leave her cat, Barley, at home in the care of a neighbor she barely trusted. But something hadn't been sitting right with her about the quarterly reports from the Hillstone Grand Hotel in San Mateo. Numbers looked good. Too good. Guest satisfaction was unusually high, especially for the off-season. Claudia had run enough properties in her 30 years in hospitality to know when something didn't add up. By the time her driver pulled into the roundabout in front of the lobby, the afternoon sun had started sliding behind the hills. Claudia stepped out of the car in low heels and a charcoal gray blazer, her hair tucked neatly in a bun. No luggage, no fanfare. The valet didn't recognize her, which she preferred. She walked straight in. The front desk was manned by a young woman named Allison who looked halfway through a customer service smile before realizing who she was greeting. Claudia gave a polite nod and waved her off before she could scramble for a clipboard. "I'm just passing through. Don't alert anyone," Claudia said, brushing past toward the elevators. What she didn't expect was the sound that stopped her cold just as she passed the long hallway near the lobby restrooms. A narrow space with a small closet for cleaning supplies. There was someone speaking French fluently, switching to Arabic mid-sentence, then Mandarin without hesitation. She paused, peeked around the corner. There he was. A man in his early 50s, maybe late 40s, dark brown skin, worn-out shoes, and a hotel maintenance badge clipped to a faded navy work shirt. He was kneeling slightly, pointing kindly at a paper map of the hotel for an elderly Chinese couple. Then he stood upright and addressed a man behind them, someone clearly lost. In fluent Arabic, his tone was calm, friendly, and precise. Claudia stood frozen for a second. She wasn't sure what she had walked into. "Thank you," the Chinese guest said in halting English, bowing slightly. "Of course. Enjoy your stay," the janitor said, bowing back with a small smile. He grabbed his mop bucket and turned down a hallway, whistling quietly to himself. Claudia stood for another 10 seconds, processing what she'd just seen. This wasn't some random multilingual concierge. This man was clearly staff. Cleaning staff. Operating like he belonged in a UN translation booth. She followed. "Excuse me?" Claudia said, keeping her tone casual. He turned around, slightly startled. "Yes, ma'am? I just saw you back there, helping those guests. I don't think I've ever seen someone switch like that. What's your name?" He hesitated. Terrence Whitlow. "You work here full-time?" "6 nights a week, mostly evenings and late checkouts. I've been here a little while." Claudia didn't tell him who she was. She didn't want to make him nervous. "You speak French, Mandarin, Arabic. Anything else?" "Portuguese, Russian, some German, a little Hindi. Enough to get through a guest issue, usually." "You learned all that where?" Terrence chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "Books, friends, late-night shows. I pick things up. I've always liked languages. Makes the world feel less far apart." There was no arrogance in his tone. If anything, he looked embarrassed. "Well," Claudia said, glancing at his mop bucket, "you've got talent most of this building probably doesn't know about." Terrence gave a modest shrug. "I just try to help. Sometimes folks come in here scared, tired, not knowing a word of English. Figured someone ought to make them feel okay." She watched him walk off quietly, back to the supply closet, as if their exchange meant nothing. But it meant something to her. She turned toward the elevator, but her thoughts didn't follow. They stayed right there, near the mop bucket, replaying every word Terrence had said. Claudia didn't sleep well that night. She booked a corner suite on the 12th floor under a different name just to keep eyes off her. But even in that quiet, upscale room with Egyptian cotton sheets and double-paned windows, her thoughts wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about Terrence Whitlow. Not just what he said, but how he carried himself. At 7:45 a.m., she skipped the buffet and went straight to the security office. A thin man in his 30s with a receding hairline looked up from his monitor as she walked in. He straightened immediately, recognizing her face. Ms. Renner, I didn't know. Relax, I'm not here for you. I need last night's lobby footage, around 4:30 p.m. Check the hallway outside the janitor's closet. He blinked but didn't argue. 5 minutes later, Claudia was watching the grainy footage of Terrence helping the elderly Chinese couple, then the Arabic-speaking man behind them. Nothing about it looked performative. There was no audience, no supervisor nearby, just instinct. She watched him bow slightly, smile, then shuffle off with his mop. Do you know him? Claudia asked. The man nodded. Yeah, that's Terrence. I've been on the team for years. Never late, never complains, cleans the guest elevators so well I think you could eat off the rails. Does he talk much? Not unless you ask him something. He's respectful. Some of the younger staff think he's strange, but he's not. He's sharp, way sharper than most people realize. Claudia leaned back in the chair and crossed her arms. Has anyone from management ever interviewed him for other roles? Not that I know of. He's night crew. People don't pay attention to night crew unless something's broken. She stared at the screen a moment longer. By 10:15, Claudia had found Terrence again. This time in the employee break room, sipping instant coffee from a chipped ceramic mug, reading something on his phone. His hair was combed back neatly. His posture was tired, but upright. Mind if I sit? She asked. He looked up, surprised. Sure, ma'am. She sat across from him. Do you know who I am? He hesitated, then gave a small nod. You're Ms. Renner, CEO of Halverson Hotels. So you did know? Yes, ma'am. I recognized you yesterday, but figured you wanted privacy. She smiled a little. I appreciate that. They sat in silence for a beat. You read a lot? She asked, nodding at his phone. Yeah, I like to learn. I can't afford classes, but the internet's free. Mostly. What do you read? Language blogs, psychology articles. Sometimes I read forums where travelers talk about what makes a hotel feel like home. You learn a lot from listening. Claudia looked at him closely. Why didn't you ever apply for anything else? Guest relations, concierge, anything? He shrugged, eyes lowering a little. No degree. No hospitality certificate. I've been told a few times that my skills don't match the roles. So I figured, maybe this is where I fit. She paused. I don't think you fit there at all, she said gently. I think we've been wasting a very rare asset. Terrence met her gaze, unsure how to respond. Listen, Claudia continued. I don't throw titles around, but what I saw yesterday, that wasn't just about language. It was empathy, poise. You gave people comfort in their own words. Do you know how rare that is in this industry? He smiled softly. I guess I just treat people how I'd want my mother treated if she walked into a hotel she didn't understand. Claudia felt something tighten in her throat. Terrence, she said, how would you feel about sitting down with me later today to talk about creating a position, one where you do more than mop the floors, one where your voice is actually part of the guest experience? He blinked. You serious? Dead serious. His eyes welled just slightly, but he didn't look away. I'd like that, ma'am. Claudia stood up, but this time the heaviness in her chest had shifted. Not gone, but moved into something that felt a lot more like purpose. Claudia didn't go to lunch. Instead, she pulled up a chair in the HR office and asked for a copy of Terrence Whitlow's file. The woman behind the desk, Denise, maybe late 40s, competent but cautious, hesitated before sliding the folder across the desk. Not much in there, Denise said, tapping the manila cover. He's quiet. Never called out sick. Always clocks out right on the dot. We just never really knew much about him. Claudia flipped it open. The resume was short. No college. High school diploma from a public school in Fresno. He'd held a few odd jobs over the years. Delivery driver, dishwasher, night clerk at a bus station. But nothing longer than a couple of years until the Hillstone. She turned the page. There were no write-ups, no complaints. Just a single letter of recognition from 4 years ago. Something about helping a guest find her lost child near the pool. Claudia read it twice. The language was formal, stiff, written by a manager who clearly didn't spend much time writing anything heartfelt. Do you remember who his supervisor was when he started? Claudia asked. Denise pulled out a drawer. I think it was Mr. Riley. He retired last year. I don't think they ever spoke much. Anyone ever sit down with Terrence for a real performance review? Denise hesitated again. Not a formal one, no. He's a janitor. Those roles usually just get the checklists. It's been that way for a while. Claudia didn't say anything. She just stared at the file. Later that day, she found herself wandering the guest floors, observing. She watched a concierge give robotic directions to a German couple who clearly didn't understand. She saw a bellboy fumble his way through a misunderstanding with a Spanish-speaking guest. None of them seemed rude, just ill-equipped. Back in the elevator, Claudia pressed the button for the service floor. She walked the back hallways looking for people who might have worked with Terrence. She wanted the truth, not the sugar-coated stuff that came once a promotion was on the table. In the laundry room, she found someone who knew him. "I've worked with him 5 years," said Gloria Tapia, a sturdy woman with streaks of gray in her braid. "He doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's something worth hearing." "Has he ever mentioned applying for another role?" Claudia asked. Gloria snorted. "He won't even ask for new gloves. Says others needed more. I've seen him help crying guests in languages I couldn't name. I've seen him step in when other staff turn away. And I've never once heard him brag." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "Does he get along with the team?" "He doesn't party with them, if that's what you mean. The younger ones think he's too serious. But when something breaks, or a guest is in trouble, they look for him. That says more than friendliness ever will." Claudia nodded. "What's your honest opinion?" Gloria looked her dead in the eye. "If you lose him, you'll regret it. Most of us already know the only reason this place runs smooth after dark is because of Terrence." That stuck with her. She thanked Gloria and walked out, her heels echoing against the tile. Every piece of information just added more weight to what she already knew. The man mopping floors and handling trash bags had been quietly holding the emotional integrity of the hotel for years. No one had asked why he was still doing that work. No one had thought to look. But Claudia couldn't ignore it anymore, and something deep inside her was starting to feel like that oversight had been personal, even if she didn't understand why just yet. By 4:30 p.m., Claudia had a room cleared on the 6th floor, a private lounge typically reserved for high-end events. She asked for 2 cups of coffee, nothing fancy, and told the assistant manager to page Terrence for a one-on-one meeting. He arrived 10 minutes later, hands scrubbed clean, uniform neat, posture unsure. The look in his eyes said he'd spent the entire walk to that room wondering if this was the day he got fired. "Terrence," Claudia said, motioning toward the chair across from her. "Please, sit." He eased into the seat slowly, eyes flicking between her face and the untouched coffee. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" he asked, voice low. "No," she said. "Quite the opposite." He nodded once, but didn't relax. The silence was a bit too long, so Claudia leaned forward. "I've spent most of my career believing I could read a room in 10 seconds, she said. "I thought I had a good sense of people, but yesterday, I saw something I didn't expect. You helping those guests. It wasn't just language. You made them feel safe. That's rare." Terrence gave a faint shrug. "I just try to see people, not labels, not clothes or jobs, just people." Claudia looked at him, not with pity, but with something close to awe. "That's exactly what I want to talk to you about." He tilted his head, cautious. "I've spoken with HR, and housekeeping, and even Gloria in laundry. The stories they shared, you helping a woman find her child near the pool, comforting a guest in Portuguese, after she got news her brother passed. None of that ever made it to upper management." Terrence looked away, almost embarrassed. "Wasn't about being noticed. Just didn't want anyone to feel alone." Claudia let that sit for a moment. "You know, my father used to say something," she continued. "If you want to find out what a place is really made of, look at who's cleaning it at 3 a.m. I always thought he meant work ethic, but I think now—" He was talking about something deeper. She paused. "I want to offer you something, Terrence. A new position. It doesn't exist yet. Not officially, but I'm creating it. Guest experience liaison. You'd be the first. He blinked, unsure whether to smile or panic. I'm not trained for anything like that. I disagree, Claudia said, almost before he finished. You're more trained than most of the staff out there with degrees. Terrence sat very still, as if he didn't want to move too fast and break whatever fragile moment had just taken shape. I don't know what to say, he whispered. You don't need to say anything now, she said. But if you accept, we'll get you training for the systems, help you adjust your schedule. I want you visible. Front desk, floor walkthroughs, cultural training for staff. You'd be helping us redefine what hospitality really means. His eyes were wet now. He blinked, trying to keep them from falling. I've spent so many years cleaning up after people, he said. I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Claudia felt her throat close up. She grabbed a napkin, handed it across the table without saying a word. He took it with both hands. I'm not looking for a thank you, she said gently, but I'm asking you to help lead something better. Not just for guests, for the staff too. You've got something the rest of us need to learn from. There was a long pause. Finally, Terrence exhaled. Then yeah, he said quietly. I'd be honored. Claudia smiled, but deep down she knew this moment wasn't about corporate titles or PR wins. It was about making something right that never should have gone unnoticed in the first place. Terrence didn't go back to his supply closet that night. Instead, he walked slowly through the west corridor, trying to absorb what had just happened. His mop cart sat unattended near the ice machine. For the first time in years, nobody asked him to clock back in. He found an empty bench near the conference wing and sat down. His phone buzzed with a message from Gloria. Heard you met with the boss. You okay? He stared at the screen for a few seconds before typing back. I think my life just changed. Not sure how to feel. In another part of the hotel, Claudia was still in her temporary office, typing a proposal draft to corporate. She didn't wait for approval. She didn't need to. Her name still carried enough weight at Halverson Holdings that she could authorize a new role, as long as she could justify the budget. But she wasn't thinking about spreadsheets. She was thinking about what Terrence said. I forgot what it felt like to be seen. She'd heard thousands of speeches in her career, elevator pitches, scripted apologies, exit interviews. But that one line hit harder than any keynote. It wasn't just about him. It was about how the company, the industry, and maybe even she herself had trained everyone to stop noticing. By the next morning, Terrence had been officially pulled from the janitorial schedule. Claudia had HR schedule him for 3 weeks of shadowing under guest services, a crash course in reservation systems, and a 2-hour uniform fitting for his new role. He didn't know what to wear on that first day. He showed up in his old work shoes, black slacks, and a dress shirt with sleeves just a little too short. He kept rubbing his palms together, like he wasn't sure if he should shake someone's hand or apologize for being there. Allison at the front desk greeted him with a quiet, "You clean up nice," followed by a grin. He smiled, but he still didn't look comfortable. The hotel manager, Kirk Donnelly, wasn't quite sure what to make of it either. I heard about this liaison role, Kirk said, pulling Claudia aside. Just wondering, are we setting a precedent here? Promoting from janitorial? Claudia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We're setting a precedent for paying attention. If that scares people, they're in the wrong industry. That ended the conversation. Terrence spent the next few days shadowing every department. He sat in on morning briefings, followed behind concierge staff, and even observed guest complaints at the call center. He didn't speak much at first, but when he did, it always mattered. At one point, during a group discussion about long wait times for non-English-speaking guests, he quietly said, "If we can make someone feel comfortable before they check in, they're more forgiving of delays. If we wait until they're angry, it's too late." Everyone fell silent. By the end of the week, Claudia got 3 emails from guests who mentioned the kind man who explained things in their language. Terrence hadn't even realized those interactions had been noticed. But what surprised her even more was how the staff responded. One of the newer bellhops, Marco D'Antoni, had been skeptical at first, but after watching Terence console a panicked woman from Turkey whose phone had been stolen, he came up to Claudia and said, "I didn't know people like him worked here. Makes me want to step it up." That was the shift Claudia hoped for. She met with Terence again the following Monday. He was in his new uniform, navy suit jacket, polished name tag, posture straighter than she'd ever seen. "How's it going?" she asked. He smiled. "I had a dream last night I showed up in my old coveralls. Then someone handed me a language test and I couldn't read it." She laughed. "Sounds about right." "But," he added, "I woke up, got dressed, and realized I don't have to prove I belong anymore." Claudia looked at him with quiet pride. But beneath that was something more personal. A recognition that, in helping Terence step into this new chapter, she might finally be rewriting a part of her own story too. The shift wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. By the second week of Terence's new role, whispers had turned to full-on curiosity. Staff who had barely acknowledged him before were now watching him, not with suspicion, but with that kind of wide-eyed attentiveness that happens when someone quietly flips a script everyone thought they understood. People started sharing stories, and not the kind you post on company newsletters. Real, raw ones. "I remember when my dad was staying here," said Sandra Malik, one of the late-shift front desk clerks. "He didn't speak any English, and no one could understand him. I was panicked. I called in sick just to come help, but when I got here, Terence was already with him, speaking Urdu like he'd been born with it. My dad called him a gentle scholar. I never forgot that. Someone else, the valet named Edwin, mentioned how, a year ago, he had been yelled at by an angry guest after a long flight. His hands shook the whole afternoon. Terence brought me tea. Didn't say much. Just sat next to me until I could breathe again. Even the most skeptical managers had to admit it. Something about the hotel just felt different, warmer, more present. Claudia wasn't surprised. But what did catch her off guard was how many stories there were. Apparently, Terence had been doing this for years. Quiet kindnesses, long conversations in stairwells, handwritten notes left for maintenance workers going through hard times. He'd become something of a ghost. The kind you only notice when he's gone. Except now, he wasn't gone. He was center stage. One afternoon, an elderly guest named Mrs. Johanna Kiel, visiting from Munich, slipped near the breakfast buffet. Nothing serious, just a stumble. Terence was at her side before anyone else could move. "In German, he asked me if I had any dizziness or pain," she said later, holding his hand like he was her son. He even knew to ask about blood thinners. Who is this man? But it wasn't just the guests. Inside the staff rooms, break areas, and loading docks, something had shifted. People spoke slower, listened longer. There was more eye contact. More thank yous that weren't perfunctory. It was subtle, but real. The bellhops started brushing up on greetings in other languages. A few desk clerks created flashcards to remember polite phrases in Spanish, French, and Korean. One housekeeper taped a list of basic Swahili phrases near her locker. Terence didn't ask for any of that. He never led a meeting or delivered some rousing speech. He just kept doing what he always did, being decent, being aware. But now, he had a name tag that said so. Claudia, for her part, stayed mostly out of the spotlight. She didn't make a big corporate announcement or use Terence's story as a marketing campaign. She just made sure his paycheck reflected his value, and that his voice was included in every weekly operations call. In one meeting, when a manager brought up complaints about guests from different countries misunderstanding hotel policies, Terence calmly asked, "Has anyone considered our signs might not be as clear as we think?" No one had. By the end of that week, the lobby had printed multilingual welcome packets. Not because corporate told them to, but because someone finally thought to ask the right person for input. Terence never acted like he was better than anyone else. In fact, he often still rolled up his sleeves and helped clean up messes when things got hectic. Once, after a pipe burst in the spa, he showed up, in his suit, with a mop and gloves. You're not on janitorial anymore, someone reminded him. He just smiled. Doesn't mean I don't know how to mop. The beauty wasn't just that Terrence had risen. It was that he never once acted like the latter mattered. By the end of the month, Terrence had his own desk near the guest services wing, not tucked away behind closed doors, but visible, accessible, a quiet seat with a view of the lobby, where he could greet people, assist in real time, and train staff who wanted to shadow him. The desk wasn't fancy, just a dark walnut surface with a small placard. Terrence Whitlow, Guest Experience Liaison. Some guests mistook him for management. Others thought he was a retired diplomat. One even asked if he was visiting from a different hotel chain to evaluate their hospitality standards. Terrence always gave the same calm response. I just work here. How can I help? It didn't take long for his presence to become something guests looked for. He began each shift 15 minutes early, walking the lobby, checking in with guests in transit, especially those standing alone or looking lost. He didn't wait to be asked. He approached gently, like a friend you didn't realize you needed. One afternoon, a teenage boy was crying near the elevator. His parents had stepped out and left him behind by mistake. The boy only spoke Korean. Terrence knelt beside him, switched to Korean without missing a beat, and calmly got his room number, called the front desk, and waited with him until his father came rushing back in a panic. No yelling, no escalation, just calm. Are you the manager? The father asked, holding his son tight. No, Terrence replied. Just someone who's been left behind before. Word about him reached Halverson's corporate headquarters before Claudia even said anything. A senior VP named Janine Alcott flew in from Seattle to observe the field experiment, as she put it. Claudia barely tolerated her phrasing, but she smiled through it. After a few hours of watching Terrence in action, Janine asked bluntly, So where'd you find this guy? Claudia answered without hesitation. He was here. We just finally looked up. That evening, in a meeting with senior staff, Janine floated the idea of creating similar positions in other properties. We'll need a pilot program, she said. And training materials. Claudia spoke up. We won't need materials. We'll need people like him. And then she looked at Terrence. How do you feel about helping us build a framework? She asked. Not just here. Maybe in Dallas, Tempe, Santa Rosa. We'd fly you out. Terrence looked stunned. I've never been on a plane. Janine chuckled. We'll fix that. The room felt different after that. Not in a performative, forced diversity initiative kind of way, but in the way a family feels after they've admitted they've overlooked someone for too long. A week later, Terrence led his first team workshop. It wasn't a seminar or PowerPoint presentation. He sat in a circle with 12 staff members, bellhops, receptionists, janitors, waitstaff, and asked them one question. When was the last time you saw someone struggling and didn't stop because it wasn't your job? Nobody answered at first. But then stories began spilling out. One woman cried as she shared how she'd ignored a crying child in the hallway because she wasn't security. Another man admitted he often avoided elderly guests with mobility issues because he didn't want to make them feel helpless. Terrence didn't judge. He just nodded and said, I've done that too. More than I care to admit. The room softened. It wasn't a training, it was a confession. And from it, real growth started. Back in his corner of the hotel, Terrence now had a small, dry erase board behind his desk where he wrote down a new word each day in a different language and a question below it. Today's word, wakarimasu. Japanese, I understand. Today's question, did you see someone today who needed to be understood? Guests started taking pictures of it. Staff started answering the questions. Even Claudia, on tough days, stopped by to read them before her meetings. Terrence hadn't just accepted a new role. He'd rewritten what that role meant. Claudia sat alone in the staff library one evening, a place barely used except for orientation days and the occasional HR seminar. The lights were low. The air smelled faintly of old binders and lemon polish. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to slow down. She opened her leather notebook, the one she'd carried since her earliest management days, and began to write. It wasn't a formal report, just thoughts. I've spent my career measuring people in numbers, response rates, efficiency scores, exit survey data, but watching Terrence, I realized something humbling. You can't spreadsheet compassion. You have to witness it. She closed the notebook and rubbed her temples. There was a part of her that felt guilty, not for noticing Terrence too late. She hadn't known him, but for creating an environment where no one else had either. She remembered the early days of her own career. Back in Toledo, working reception at a struggling hotel on the edge of a freeway. Guests didn't tip. Managers barked orders. And yet, every time something broke, it was the quiet janitor, Mr. Olon, who stayed late to fix things without complaint. He barely spoke English. But once, he repaired the heater in the middle of a snowstorm while everyone else left early. Claudia had never thanked him. She never even asked for his last name. And somehow, all these years later, that shame returned with a vengeance. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder, one she wouldn't ignore again. Later that week, she invited Terrence to join her for coffee in her office. This time, she brewed it herself. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," she said, handing him the mug. "What we leave behind." Terrence nodded slowly. "I don't think about that much." "Well," she replied, "you should. Because whether you meant to or not, you've started one." He smiled at that, but didn't say anything. "I want to tell you something I haven't shared," Claudia continued, looking out the window. "When I was 29, I nearly quit the industry. I'd been passed over for a promotion by someone with less experience and more connections. I felt invisible, like I could do everything right and still be left behind." Terrence listened carefully, letting the silence stretch until she was ready to continue. "A night porter, this tiny old woman named Della, sat with me during my overnight shift. She gave me half her sandwich and said, 'You stay, because one day someone will need to see themselves in you.'" Terrence blinked, then whispered, "She sounds like someone I would have liked." Claudia's voice caught slightly. "She was, but I didn't stay in touch. I lost track. I always told myself I was too busy." They sat for a moment, drinking quietly. "You know what's strange?" she added. "All the people I've ever reported to, executives, analysts, board members, I barely remember their names. But I remember Della's sandwich, just like people here will remember what you said in their language when they felt alone." Terrence stared at his coffee and said, almost under his breath, "Sometimes it just takes one moment to change what a person believes about themselves." Claudia looked at him. Exactly. That afternoon, she typed a memo to the regional board. It was short, clear. "Moving forward, all Halverson hotels will create at least one guest experience liaison role, starting with our top 25 locations. The hiring criteria will prioritize emotional intelligence, cultural knowledge, and multilingual ability. Formal degrees optional. Our industry doesn't just need better systems, it needs better hearts." She hit send. Then she picked up her phone and called the maintenance office. "Tell Terrence he's off guest floor duty today. I'm flying him to our property in Scottsdale tomorrow. They've got a training team waiting for him." The voice on the other end replied, "He's already helping a new family check in. They just flew in from Istanbul." Claudia smiled to herself. She hung up the phone, realizing some of the best decisions she'd ever made weren't based on numbers at all, but on moments. Moments like this. Terrence stood near the curb outside the Scottsdale property, his blazer slung over one shoulder and a small carry-on bag in his hand. Arizona heat pressed down like a hand on his back, but he didn't mind. This was the first time he'd flown in his life, and every moment, from takeoff to the final descent, had felt surreal. The hotel van pulled up. A young man jumped out mid-20s, wearing the same Navy Halverson uniform Terrence now wore. "You, Mr. Whitlow?" "Just, Terrence is fine," he said, offering his hand. The young man grinned. "Heard a lot about you. You're kind of a legend." Terrence chuckled softly. "I doubt that." Inside the hotel, the staff had already gathered, not in a formal setting, but in a wide-open lounge area with folding chairs and notepads. They didn't know exactly what to expect. Some thought a corporate trainer was coming. Others figured this was a diversity seminar. Nobody guessed it would be a janitor from San Mateo with a quiet voice and decades of perspective. He walked to the center and cleared his throat. "I'm not here to impress anyone," he began. "I don't have a title that means anything outside this building. But I've been in hotels long enough to know one thing. We don't remember how clean the windows were. We remember how someone made us feel when we couldn't speak the language, or when we were scared or lost." Silence followed, but it was the good kind. I used to think being invisible was part of the job, that if I just stayed quiet and cleaned up after people, that was enough. But it turns out, people notice, eventually. The trick is, you have to keep showing up, even when they don't. He smiled, glanced around, then added, "If you can do that, even once a day, you're changing more than just a guest's experience. You're changing the culture, quietly, permanently." Afterward, 2 housekeeping staff members approached him. One asked in hesitant Spanish if it was okay to speak in her native language during work hours if it helped a guest. "Of course it is," he said. "Language isn't noise, it's belonging." The other, a maintenance tech, just wanted to shake his hand and say thanks. "You make it feel like it's not too late to be seen." Terrence smiled. "It's never too late. You just have to stop hiding from yourself." Back in San Mateo, Claudia received an update from the Scottsdale team. They'd already started drafting their own version of the liaison role, tailored to the needs of their guests. And the new general manager had asked if Terrence could help onboard someone next month in Santa Rosa. She didn't respond right away. She just sat in her office, looking at the empty hallway where she had first overheard him speaking 4 different languages while pushing a mop bucket. One hallway. One moment. Everything changed. Not because someone filed a complaint or demanded recognition, but because someone finally paid attention. Sometimes, the greatest transformations start when we slow down long enough to truly look. At the stranger in the hallway. At the colleague who always stays late. At the voice that rarely interrupts. At ourselves. You never know who you're working beside, or what quiet brilliance is waiting to be heard. So, ask yourself today, who have I overlooked? Because there's someone like Terrence Whitlow in every building, every company, every corner of the world. Someone with more humanity, more skill, and more heart than they've ever been credited for. Maybe they don't speak 9 languages. Maybe they've never stepped onto a plane, but maybe, just maybe, they've been holding the place together all along. All they need is for someone to notice. If this story made you think, if it made you reflect on someone in your life who deserves more than they've been given, then share this video. Leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe for more human stories that matter. Because the next one might just be yours. Be